Thank you very much, Trimita.
खूप धन्यवाद
And
तुमचा.
welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Susanna. Going to turn on the video. Here we are.
माझं नाव सुजाना
So,
आहे. मी व्हिडिओ ऑन करून.
my name is Susanna. I am with Public Services International, and on behalf of Focus on the Global South IT for Change Third World Network, I welcome you to this webinar on why does data governance matter for workers'
भागात
rights.
जगातल्या दक्षिण भागात राहणाऱ्या देशांचे जे IT
This
नेटवर्क
is
आहे
the third and
त्यांच्या
last
वतीनं
webinar in a series on
हे
digital trade
शेवटचं
and workers' rights.
वेबिनार आहे ज्याच्यामध्ये
And we will
कामगारांचे
follow a
हक्क
similar model than the
त्याबद्दल
previous
पण आपण
webinars,
चर्चा करणार आहे. अशाच
which means
पद्धतीचे
that we
काही
will have three interventions, each of
डिजिटल
them followed by comments, questions, and
मुद्द्यांबद्दल
around 30
किंवा
minutes
त्यांना घेऊन
discussions
आपण
at the
ह्याच्या आधी
end.
पण चर्चा
And
आयोजित
like the
केल्या होत्या.
previous webinars, we really look forward for
आणि
your
या
active
सगळ्या
engagement, so that this
चर्चांमधून
becomes a
आजही
really
आम्ही अशी अपेक्षा करतो
interactive
की
discussion.
पहिल्या काही
And
वेबिनारला
we
आम्हाला
are
जसा
amongst
प्रतिसाद दिला
friends,
त्या
most
पद्धतीने
of
तुमची सहभागिता
you know each
आताही
other.
राहील आणि तुम्ही
So
हिरिरीने
really do
यामध्ये
feel free to
चर्चामध्ये पण
intervene
सहभाग
and
घ्याल.
share your views as
आणि तुमचे जे
we
काही
go
मत
ahead.
असतील किंवा याबद्दलचे जे काही
The only
म्हणणं
request
असेल
is
ते
that
नक्की
while
तुम्ही चॅट बॉक्समध्ये
the
लिहा.
other speakers, the interventions are going on,
सर्व
please keep your
वक्त्यांना
mics on mute so that it doesn't
ज्यावेळी मी
disturb
आमंत्रित करते त्यावेळी सर्व सहभागींना
the
ही विनंती
discussion.
आहे की तुम्ही
So before we move
सगळेजण
ahead to
म्यूट
today's discussion,
चॅनलवरती राहावे.
we
आणि
would like to
आपण
remind
या
ourselves of
चर्चेसाठी
what was
या
discussed
चर्चेमध्ये
last
पुढे
time.
जात
And for
असताना
that, I would like to
मागच्या
invite
वेळी
Mimi
कशा
Corbina from
पद्धतीने
Focus on the Global South, who moderated the
चर्चा
previous
झाली होती
session,
आणि
to
त्यामध्ये
give
आपण
us a
काय
short
बोललो
summary.
त्याबद्दल पण एक थोडक्यात त्याचा सारांश आपल्याला
Thank
बेनी
you.
सांगतील.
Presentations
खूप
and
धन्यवाद.
discussions at the session last week
मागच्या वेळेला ज्यावेळी
were
मागच्या आठवड्यात
situated
ज्या
in the
चर्चा झाल्या होत्या
context
त्याच्यामध्ये
of privatization of
साधारणपणे
public
पार्श्वभूमी
services,
ही
which is a key
खाजगीकरणाशी
agenda of the
संबंधित
current government,
आणि कशा
but
पद्धतीने
also
आत्ताच्या
drawing
सरकारने
from previous regimes as well, which were also
आत्ताच्या
pushing
सरकारने
privatization,
सार्वजनिक
as we know,
क्षेत्रांचं
for the
खाजगीकरण कशा
last
पद्धतीने करण्यास सुरुवात केली आहे अशा
2.5
अनेक
decades or
मुद्द्यांवरती
so.
चर्चा केली.
But
मागच्या
the
साधारण एक
qualitative change that
20-25
we're witnessing
वर्षातले जे
today
काही
is how the
घडामोडी
rise
झाल्या
of
बदल
big tech
झाले त्याचा
firms,
आत्ताच्या
which are today the
परिस्थितीमध्ये
world's
कशा पद्धतीने
largest and
त्याचा परिणाम
most
होतोय
powerful
या पद्धतीची
corporations,
चर्चा
are now
विशेषतः
further
केली गेली आणि
accentuating the
आता
process
पुढे
of
जाऊन आपण
privatization. For
या
example,
पद्धतीच्या
the urban
खाजगीकरणातली
reform
आणखी
process in India,
पुढे
which
जाऊन
began
उदाहरणार्थ
with the UPA
शहरीकरणामध्ये होणारी
government's
सुधारणा
NURM project,
त्याबद्दल
is now called the Smart
आपण
Cities
चर्चा
project. And
करणार
the
आहोत.
Smart
उदाहरणार्थ
Cities
स्मार्ट
project
सिटीच्या
is
संदर्भातली
advancing
काही चर्चा सुरू आहे.
outsourcing and the creation
कशा
of
पद्धतीने त्याला
undemocratic and
कंत्राटी पद्धतीने
unaccountable
बाहेर काम
parallel
करण्यासाठी
bodies of governance such as special
निमंत्रण देणे
purpose
वगैरे
vehicles,
या पद्धतीच्या
SPVs,
चर्चा कशा
which are
पद्धतीने होत
resulting in a number of
आहेत त्याबद्दल
contracts
आता
for
बोललं
private
जाईल.
corporations
आणि कंत्राटी
in the
पद्धतीने
area of
मोठमोठ्या
water,
कंपन्यांना
sanitation, transport,
गेलेलं जे
including
कंत्राट
tech
आहे
firms, the large
ज्याच्यामध्ये
tech firms for
स्वच्छतेच्या
managing
सुविधाबद्दल किंवा
data
पाण्याच्या
and for
सुविधाबद्दलचे
surveillance of
अशा
workers.
अनेक
And our first
प्रकल्पांवरती
speaker,
त्यांना
Jammu Anand
त्याची
from the
नेमणूक
Nagpur Municipal Employees Union,
करण्यात आलेली आहे.
highlighted
नागपूरमधून
how
जमुना
this
अली जे
process was
आपल्यासोबत
leading to three disturbing outcomes.
त्यांनी चर्चा
One
आता
was a
करतील की
massive loss
आणि
of public funds being paid out to these
विशेषतः
private
सार्वजनिक
entities.
क्षेत्रातलं जे अनुदान
Two,
कमी
the
झालेलं
capture
आहे.
of public urban
दुसरं जे
data by tech
सार्वजनिक
corporations,
क्षेत्राचं
which will
वरती
lead
ज्या
to
पद्धती
private
सार्वजनिक
control over many public
क्षेत्रावरती
services.
व्यक्तिगत
And the third point
नियंत्रणासाठी
that he
ज्या
made was
पद्धतीने
how this was also
ते
undermining
हायजॅक करण्याचा
workers'
प्रयत्न
rights
केलाय,
through surveillance.
त्याचं अधिग्रहण करण्याचा प्रयत्न केला
Similarly, in the
त्याबद्दल पण.
health sector,
आणि
the aggressive push
स्वास्थ्य
by this government
आरोग्याच्या
to
सेवा
digitize all health-related
संदर्भात पण
data
ज्या
is
पद्धतीने
resulting in a windfall for private
माहिती
corporations
किंवा
such as
त्याच्या
IT
संदर्भातला जो
companies and
डेटा आहे
insurance firms.
त्याला ज्या
And
प्रकारे
Deepika Joshi from the Janswastya
त्यावरती
Abhiyan argued that this
अधिग्रहण करण्याचा प्रयत्न
manipulation
केला
of
त्याबद्दल पण
data by
चर्चा
companies
होईल. आणि
can
आज
be at the detriment of
आपल्यासोबत
patients and
वक्त्यांमध्ये
public health. And lastly, at the level of international trade negotiations, the agenda is to push for the free flow of data,
नंदिनी
no
असतील,
rules to store data locally,
जय
no
विप्रा
duties
असतील
and
तर ते पण
taxes on
आपल्याशी
online
संवाद साधतील.
transactions.
आणि
And Ranja
ज्या
Sengupta from Third World
पद्धतीने
Network highlighted
ऑनलाईन
that this will lead to a sharp
व्यासपीठांवरती
fall in
ऑनलाईन
government
पद्धतीने ज्या
revenues
पद्धतीचे
as large tech
व्यवहार इथे
firms
होत
will
आहेत
locate themselves in tax havens,
त्याचाही
and with no
ह्या
customs
सगळ्या गोष्टींशी
duties,
काय
this can
संबंध आहे
lead to
त्याबद्दल पण चर्चा
deindustrialization
केली जाणार आहे.
of countries like India if everything is imported duty free. I mean, there are obviously other aspects that I've left out of this short summary, but just to let all of you know that we will send you all a comprehensive report of last week's webinar. Thank you.
त्यामुळे आम्ही एक विशिष्ट प्रकारे
Thank you very much, Benny. So today we will go deeper into the question of the regulation
त्याचा एक अहवाल
and the
पण आम्ही
systems,
आपल्यासमोर
both
सादर करू
infrastructure or policy system
आणि
that
त्या
govern
संदर्भात
data. And these will be done both in terms of data governance that promotes workers' rights at the
आपण
workplace or in the
साधारणपणे
broader world
माहिती
of work,
आणि त्याच्या
as well as
संदर्भातले जे
looking at data governance that promotes the public interest in our
ज्या
societies.
पद्धतीची
We will discuss
डेटा म्हणजे
questions of
माहितीला
data
घेऊन आणि
around
सार्वजनिक
individual
क्षेत्राशी त्याचा
data,
कसा संबंध आहे
data
त्याबद्दल,
about you,
व्यक्तिगत
about
जी
me
माहिती
as
आहे
individuals,
किंवा जे
but
संस्थात्मक
also, and
माहिती
maybe
आहे
even more
त्या
importantly,
पद्धतीने पण
data that is aggregated, anonymized,
चर्चा
which
करणं
is
गरजेचं आहे की
sometimes
कशा
called
पद्धतीने
mass
माहिती
data,
ही
and
खास
where
करून
individuals are not really what matter,
वाढवून
but
फुगवून
what
सांगितली
matters
जाते,
are the
कधी
patterns of
मुद्दामहून ती
our
लपवली पण
behavior
जाते.
as collective.
या पद्धतीच्या
And this is
मुद्द्यांना
actually
घेऊन
very
पण
important
चर्चा
in
करणं
public
गरजेचं आहे.
services, considering that public services can be both the source to
आणि
collect
सार्वजनिक
such mass data, as well as potentially they can also
सार्वजनिक
be
क्षेत्राशी संबंधित असलेल्या
users of
कामामध्ये
that
आपण
data in order to
व्यक्तिगत
be able
असो
to
किंवा
plan and
मोठ्या
design public
पातळीवरती
services better.
लोकसंख्येच्या
And the
पातळीवरती असो तर
insights
ते
that
पण त्या
allow
माहितीचा
to take
आपण
decisions
काय
based on
पद्धतीने
these mass
कोण कसं
data is
निर्णय घेणार,
sometimes
प्रशासकीय
referred to as
पातळीवरती
digital
त्याचं काय
intelligence. So
पद्धतीने
that will be another
कशा
element
पद्धतीने या
of our
गोष्टी
discussion.
वापरल्या जातील
And until now, we
त्याबद्दल पण
have
चर्चा
only
करणं गरजेचं
spoken
आहे.
of instances where
आणि
in the two
ज्या
previous
पद्धतीचे
webinars, we spoke mostly
मागच्या
of
2
instances
वेबिनारमध्ये
where
आपण ही चर्चा केली होती की
data
विशेषतः
is
की
owned and
माहिती
used
डेटा
by private
हे
company for
बहुतेक
profit,
वेळेला
with a
खाजगी
profit motive,
कंपन्यांकडून त्यांच्या स्वतःच्या
in
फायद्यासाठी
many ways
फायदा
privatized
लाटण्यासाठी
data.
वापरला
And
जातो.
today we
ते
also want to
आपल्या
explore whether
अ,
and how
आपल्या
data
हिशोबाने आपल्या
governance can
सोयीने
promote
त्याला
public or community
वापरतात आणि
ownership and
डेटा
control over
गव्हर्नन्स
data
किंवा
for
डेटाचं
workers'
व्यवस्थापन
rights in the
हा जो
public
मुद्दा आहे
interest,
त्याचं ज्या
with
पद्धतीने
the idea
वापर खरं तर
that
व्हायला पाहिजे ते
data and
लोकांच्या
data
हितासाठी व्हायला
intelligence
पाहिजे,
can be a
पण
public
तसं
good for
होताना
our
दिसत
societies.
नाही आणि ही
So
खरंच
for this,
काळजीची
we
बाब आहे.
have three speakers.
आणि आज आपल्यासोबत 3
V.
वक्ते आहेत.
Narasimhan,
ते
who is the
व्ही
General
नरसिम्हा
Secretary
जे
of the All India
कार्यकारी संचालक आहेत,
Life
जे
Insurance Corporation,
जे
of the All India Life
संपूर्ण भारतीय
Insurance
राष्ट्रीय स्तरावरचे
Employees Federation. Sorry.
जे
And
कामगार
he is also the South Asia representative
लाईफ
for
इन्शुरन्सचे जे
BSI
कामगार संघटना
Asia
आहे त्याचे
Pacific
ते अध्यक्ष
Regional
आहेत.
Executive Committee.
आणि
We will have
एशिया पॅसिफिक
Nandini
रिजनल
Chami, who
कमिटी
is
जी
the
प्रादेशिक समिती आहे त्याला पण
Deputy
त्याचे
Director
पण
at
प्रतिनिधी
IT for
आहेत.
Change. And
आणि
Zai
माहिती
Vipra,
तंत्रज्ञान
who is a researcher
बदलासाठी
with
माहिती
the VD
तंत्रज्ञानाचा
Center
वापर
for
कसा
Legal
केला जाऊ
Policy.
शकतो त्याबद्दल पण
So
ते
without
काम
any
करतात.
delay, I
त्यामुळं
will invite
आणखी
V. Narasimhan
उशीर
to speak
न
about
करता
public
मी
data infrastructure and workers' rights
व्ही
in the
नरसिम्हन
Life
यांना मी
Insurance Corporation.
विनंती
Narasimhan,
करते की
please go ahead. You
त्यांनी
have 10
कृपया
minutes.
आपलं म्हणणं इथे
Actually,
मांडावं.
I was not sure whether I will be able to join this meeting today because I am from
मला खरं
Hyderabad and
खात्री
the
नव्हती
city is
की
marooned because of
आज
torrential rains. Only
मी
some time back the power
आज
was
मी या
restored.
मीटिंग मध्ये येऊ शकेन की
Thanks.
नाही याच्याबद्दल मला खात्री नव्हती, पण धन्यवाद मला तुम्ही इथे
We were
बोलावलं.
talking about
आज खूपच
digitalization, the
अनिश्चित
introduction
पद्धती
of new digital
इकडे
technologies
समस्यांचा
and
सामना करावा लागत
communications,
होता आम्हाला हैदराबादमध्ये, परंतु
production and
आज
administration processes
या
has
पद्धतीची
become
चर्चा
one of the key drivers of change
आपण
in
करू
economies
शकतो.
and societies
ज्या
worldwide.
पद्धतीने
Digitalization in public
समाजामध्ये
services can be
डिजिटलायझेशनला घेऊन
generally referred
आर्थिक
to
दृष्ट्या पण बदल
as
झालाय,
a whole
सामाजिक
range
दृष्ट्या
of
बदल झालाय,
consequences
तर
stemming
त्याच्यामध्ये
from the
त्याचे
interaction
फायदे तोटे
between the
हे
public
सगळ्यांना
service
सहन करायला
users and
लागत आहेत.
workers with new digital technologies and refers to the economic, social, employment, and workplace transformations such consequences entail. Digital transformation in public services are heavily pushed by global digital tech corporations
आणि त्या
like
पद्धतीने
Google, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, etc. Together with global service corporations
त्या
that
पद्धतीने
see
खूप
digitalization
वेगवेगळ्या
in
मायक्रोसॉफ्ट
public
असतील किंवा
services
इतक्या
as a
मोठमोठ्या आयटी
lucrative
कंपन्या
opportunity.
त्यांनी ज्या
And
पद्धतीने
the same players also carry a major interest to access citizens, users, and business data to further develop their activities,
पुढे
as
जाऊन
data is the next fuel of economic development.
तर पुढच्या पातळीवरती पण या सगळ्या आर्थिक
If you see
विकासाच्या
the
बद्दलच्या
shapes and shades of
विचार केला पाहिजे या
digitalization,
खाजगी
how
कंपन्यांनी
it
पण,
affects
कारण
delivery,
डिजिटलायझेशन
quality and access, employment, working conditions and
एखाद्या
labor rights.
गोष्टीपर्यंत चा लाभ घेणं
I
किंवा
would like to take
त्याच्या
you,
संदर्भातले
introduce you to the case
कसे
of Life
फायदे
Insurance
होतात
Corporation of
किंवा
India,
कसे फायदे
which is a public sector
किंवा
undertaking.
त्याचे काय नुकसान होतील, या
LIC
सगळ्या गोष्टींना
is a
खूप
public
महत्वपूर्ण पद्धतीने
sector
बघणं गरजेचं आहे.
multinational
उदाहरणार्थ
financial
LIC
conglomerate.
जर विचार केला तर
LIC has been
LIC
declared
हे
as best IT user many times in the past.
सर्वात चांगल्या पद्धतीने माहिती तंत्रज्ञानाचा वापर
Digitalization and
करणारी
computerization
संस्था किंवा
has
कंपनी
been the
किंवा
hallmark
अशा
of
पद्धतीची
LIC
संस्था म्हणून त्याला
much
गणलं
before
गेलंय
the
आणि
same
त्यांनी
came
ज्या
into
पद्धतीने
focus.
सार्वजनिक क्षेत्राशी
From
पण
computer, that is computing machines, which were converting the data into magnetic media, and
त्याच्यामुळे
machines which filled many rooms.
मशीन्स
We have
असतील
moved to
किंवा
an era
कम्प्युटर
where the
असतील
systems
किंवा
are very
या
strong
पद्धतीचे
and
वेगवेगळे
fast, yet very small in
गोष्टींनी
size
पार पाडता
and
तुम्ही
sometimes not physically visible also. Why
त्या
digitalization
यंत्राच्या
in LIC?
मार्गाने तुम्ही
For rendering better services to the policyholders
खोल्या भरू
and
शकता
for
किंवा
making the jobs being
फक्त
performed by
त्या
employees
पद्धतीचा वापर चालू
more
करू शकता,
accurate,
पण
reduction in time, and also for upkeep of employee records.
आणि
The
त्यामुळं
key characteristics of
विशेषतः
the
बघायला पाहिजे
digitalization
की
system in LIC,
डिजिटलायझेशन मुळे की
in
कशा
contrast with other
पद्धतीचं
companies, the digitalization system is not outsourced but built in-house. This means LIC employees are trained to manage the
LIC
systems,
जे
data infrastructure,
कर्मचारी आहेत त्यांना
collection of data
अशा
is done
पद्धतीने
at the
त्यांचे
branches and the
प्रशिक्षण
servers
दिले
are
गेले की ते
located
खूप
at the
वेगवेगळ्या
divisional offices.
पद्धतीने
As the updation is being done in
मूलभूत
real time,
जे
in future the servers may be centralized in a few places. Earlier the data stored in magnetic
पायाभूत
media
सुविधा ज्या
form,
असतील
now
त्या
cloud
संदर्भात पण ते
computing is
एकदम
being
योग्य पद्धतीने
used.
काम करतात
There
आणि
are clear
वेगवेगळ्या ठिकाणी
protocols to manage the data that is collected from LIC users. This is more about individual data protection and privacy issues.
त्यामुळे खास
Generally,
विशेषतः माहिती
in the office systems, no pen drive, no CD, no Wi-Fi, wireless
सर्वसाधारणपणे
connectivity allowed in office
वायफाय
systems. Hence, data
किंवा
security is ensured.
सीडी किंवा पेन
Every
ड्राईव्ह हे
office
सुद्धा अलाउड
has a
नसले
core group of
पाहिजेत, ज्या
employees and
पद्धतीने
administrators. They have the permissions to manage the data. Every action of the core group is documented in a transparent manner. The perspective
पूर्ण पद्धतीने
aim that underlines the way
जी माहिती
protocols
आहे,
are
डेटा
drawn
आहे, ही
is data
खूपच
security and better
सुरक्षित आहे
accessibility of the data.
आणि त्या पद्धतीने
The employees
त्या पद्धतीने पण याचा
representatives
विचार
are
व्हायला हवा,
briefed
कारण
about the developments
जे
which are taking
कर्मचारी
place with
आहेत
regard to the modules during the meetings which are called information sharing sessions. The data pertaining to employees' salary records, employee benefits, etc. are captured and maintained by the establishment department by employees working in the department. Surveillance on employee work output,
आणि कशा पद्धतीने
performance
निगराणी ठेवली
assessment
चालली आहे,
is not done.
कर्मचाऱ्यांवर कशा पद्धतीने
Separate
ठेवली चालली आहे,
procedure is
याच्या पण
there
बद्दल विचार
for that
होणं गरजेचं
purpose,
आहे, कारण
which is not dependent on the system output surveillance.
ज्या पद्धतीने
LIC is
निगराणी
treated as an
त्यांच्यावरती
essential
ठेवली जाते.
service by the central government. Hence, we were going to offices even during the COVID lockdown period. But
अगदी कोरोनाच्या
will
काळात
restriction
पण
on the number of employees to
ज्या
attend
पद्धती
office to maintain the physical distancing as per government orders. Work from home is not
अगदी
full-fledged
कोरोनाच्या काळात पण
in
घरून
LIC as
काम
we deal with the
करण्यासाठी पण
policyholders. Premium collection is
प्रयत्न
to be
केले गेले,
done,
परंतु
documents to
जेव्हा
be collected from policyholders for
कलेक्शनची वेळ
settlement
येते
of
आणि
claims,
तुम्हाला
loans, etc.,
हे घ्यायला
which
लागतं
cannot be
किंवा
done in work
कर्जाच्या
from
बाबतीत
home
असेल,
mode of work.
त्यामुळे हे सगळ्या गोष्टी
However,
घरून
we are trying to do
होतीलच
some
असं काही
back-end jobs which are
त्याच्याबद्दल गॅरंटी
very
देता येत नाही, परंतु
basic
तरीही
and
आम्ही
still
खूप
evolving.
प्रयत्न केला की जास्तीत
The
जास्त
data
पद्धतीने
governance
घरून
system in
कसं काम होऊ
LIC
शकेल, परंतु
definitely
आम्ही
promotes public
कामासाठी
interest.
जरी आलो तरी खूप
And as the data
काळजीपूर्वक
is
पद्धतीने
collected,
शारीरिक
stored,
अंतर जे राखण्याचे
managed,
सरकारी नियम आहेत, आम्ही
and
त्याचा पूर्ण
accessed
सन्मान
by
करतो
the
आणि त्या
employees of
पद्धतीनेच काम
LIC
करतो.
only, and not by any outsider or a multinational corporation. Even the software needed to manage this huge data is developed by the employees only in centers which are called software development centers, in which the employees are
त्यामुळे
working.
त्यांनी हे पण बघितलं
This
पाहिजे की
leads to better
कर्मचारी
service to
आणि ज्या
policyholders and
पद्धतीने
also takes
ते
care of their interest. Hence,
त्यांच्या
very low
हितसंबंधांबद्दल
or
पण कर्मचारी
negligible
विचार
amount of
करतायत
attrition is there of the
आणि
employees.
स्वतः
If one employee goes on promotion
आरोग्याची
or
पण काळजी
transfer,
घेत आहेत आणि
another employee
आरोग्याच्या
is trained
संदर्भातले
and he is
विम्याचे
replaced.
पण जे काही
Hence,
मुद्दे असतील
there is
त्याबद्दल
no
पण ते
dependency on
विचारपूर्वक
anybody, and there is
काम करताना
a
दिसत
huge amount of transparency
खूप
and
मोठ्या
confidence.
पातळीवरची पारदर्शकता
The workers'
विश्वासार्हता
interest is also
यामध्ये
promoted,
आहे
taken care of,
आणि
as the data is captured and maintained
बहुतेक
by the
वेळेला
employees only
डेटा
with
किंवा
workers'
माहिती जी आहे
involvement. And
त्याच्यातनं
also
कामगारांच्या
transparency is
हक्कांचं
there,
कसं
and no
संवर्धन होऊ
surveillance
शकतं
issues are there till
याबद्दल
now.
पण
Data is being collected, used by workers,
याबद्दल
software
पण
being developed by workers, and safety of the data
खूप काळजी
collected
घेत
is
असतो की
ensured in a
डेटा
transparent way.
खूप पारदर्शक
We
पद्धतीने
strongly
पण
believe that our
सुरक्षित व्हायला
data
पाहिजे
is our
आणि आम्ही
property,
खूप
and collecting, managing,
आमचा असा
using
विश्वास
the
आहे की
data
डेटाचं
in the
व्यवस्थापन
interest of the
ते कसं
policyholders
वापरलं
is the right
जायला
way
पाहिजे
to do it.
आणि ते जास्तीत
We
जास्त
often think
विमाधारकांच्या
that
हितासाठी
there
त्याचा
is no
वापर
other
व्हावा यासाठी
model
आम्ही कटिबद्ध
than
आहोत
data being a private property of the
डेटा
company that collects
हे
it.
म्हणजे
The LIC
एक
experience reiterates the same.
प्रायव्हेट
Fair
प्रॉपर्टी
digital transition is the key.
आहे
People's
खाजगी
money
मालमत्ता
for
असते
people's
याबद्दल
welfare,
आम्ही
policyholders'
खूप सजग
data for
आहोत
their
आणि
welfare,
आम्ही याबद्दल विचारही आम्ही
employees'
असा करतो
data
की
for their safety and welfare being
कामगारांचा
maintained in
कर्मचाऱ्यांचा
a transparent
पण जो
way.
डेटा आहे तो पारदर्शक
This is
पण
how
सुरक्षित
LIC is functioning.
असावा याबद्दल आम्ही खूप नेहमीच काळजी घेतो
Susana, I have time, or can I take
सुजना
questions
माझ्याकडे
now?
वेळ आहे का
You have 2 more minutes if you want, or we could go with questions as you
तुम्हाला
decide.
जर बोलायचं असेल तुम्ही 2-1 मिनिट बोलू शकता नसेल तर आपण प्रश्नोत्तराकडे वळू
I would like to make 1 or 2 points.
Sure.
मला आणखी 1-2 मुद्दे बोलायचे
Generally, the digital technology in public services is driven by private corporate interest.
टेक्नॉलॉजी
We have
जी आहे
successfully overcome
तंत्रज्ञान
that,
जे आहे ते
defeated that.
बहुतेक वेळेला
Corporate-led
खाजगी
digitalization is
कंपन्यांकडे
generally
याचे मालकी
associated
असते
with
परंतु
major data
LIC
privacy
सारख्या
abuse,
सार्वजनिक
resulting
क्षेत्रात
in
काम करणाऱ्या
worsening public
सरकारी
service
कंपनीने
and
ज्या
quality and
पद्धतीने या
efficiency of the
माहितीवरती
service.
नियंत्रण मिळवलेलं आहे
We
ते
have
खरंच आम्हाला वाखाणण्याजोगं
overcome that
आहे असं
also.
वाटतं
Generally,
आणि
cost cutting
वेळोवेळी
driven
पण आम्ही या
digitalization
वेगवेगळ्या
tends to
पद्धतीने
replace and reduce
डिजिटलायझेशनच्या
or cuts, it leads to cuts
मुद्द्यांना
in
घेऊन
jobs, increases worker surveillance and performance monitoring,
आम्ही
increases working time and extends
कामाच्या
job
बद्दल
tasks. This
कामगारांवर नाही पण
also we have
कामासंदर्भात निगराणी
successfully
कशी
overcome
जास्त चांगल्या
through the
पद्धतीने होऊ शकते
transparency and
ज्याच्यातून
collective
जास्तीत जास्त
participation and
सार्वजनिक
ownership
क्षेत्राला
of the
फायदा
data.
होऊ शकेल आम्ही
Thank you.
यांच्याबद्दल पण खूप प्रयत्न केले धन्यवाद
Thank you so much, Narasimhan. I think that was very interesting to get an understanding of, some level of alternative perspective on how data can be managed. And as you mentioned, the interest of LIC to create its own capacity in terms of the workers, its own infrastructure, its own systems. It would be interesting to dig a bit more into cloud computing, considering that very often cloud computing means that servers are not in the country. So that would be, for instance, something that I would be interested to know more about. I think it's very important how you mentioned that the way the management has worked with workers to develop digitalization that makes that workers are confident that this is not a tool against them, but it's a tool for them to do their work in a better way. So these are very interesting elements, and maybe also something that for me would be interesting to know is what do you think would happen with the investment, considering that that's something that the government has on its mind for the LIC. But I would like to open now for discussion. If we can have Shubham, so opening it for discussion, if you can either unmute and speak directly or put your hand up if you want to ask any questions to Narasimhan or make any interventions. Please go ahead.
I'd like to ask a question. I can't seem to put my hand up because I'm a co-host.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Narasimhan. My question is about if LIC has managed to quantify the cost savings that you've sort of made by not outsourcing, by building your own capacities. Because I remember one of the points that Jammu Anand highlighted in his intervention last week was that how urban local bodies are paying out huge sums of money to private corporations to manage data, be it in water, be it in sanitation, be it in other levels of urban governance. And you have a case that points to the contrary, that you can actually do it in-house and you can, but I think it'll be good to put out this information in terms of how LIC has done that. Is there some study that you can point us to that can be further publicized to show that the public sector has capacity and it can lead to huge cost savings and efficiency and, like you said, sort of workers and consumer welfare?
Thank you, Benny. Do we have anyone else who would like to intervene or ask further questions? Okay. I think Narasimhan, if you want to go ahead with
Yes.
the question that Benny raised and the ones I raised too.
Yes, yes, yes. It is very interesting for you to know that LIC has pursued digitalization in-house, not for saving, cutting cost. Because LIC is having huge funds. We are funding many of the government projects. We are having shares in many private and public sector companies also. This digitalization in-house capacity building was done to protect our data, to ensure that we have control on our data. Money is not an issue. And you will be surprised to know, Susana, the cloud computing is there, but the data is not only in the country, it is within LIC, managed by LIC only. And we don't even use what you call Microsoft software. We don't use that. We don't use any multinational corporation software in LIC. We use only our IT for change. The person, what is his name? He uses the software Linux. We use that. So it is open. We create our own software. Nobody has access to our software. Nobody has access to our data. And cost cutting, actually cost cutting is not an issue. We use it as per our convenience and to protect our secrecy, ensure that our data is with us only and nobody else gets a hand on it. Even workers' data, we have total control on that. We negotiate with the management and how this data can be used and for what purpose it has to be used and for what purpose it should not be used. We negotiate, sit with them, and accordingly it is done. Surveillance is out of question. As of date, no zero surveillance.
That's very interesting. Nandini would like to also ask a question.
Yes.
So I'm going to give her the opportunity. Nandini, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the very, interesting and very evocative presentation, Mr. Narasimhan. So my question is this. I understand that for the digitization of the data resources itself and maintaining the internal data records of the corporation, LIC did not go outside and everything was done in-house. But what happens when, there are all these proposals in many public service agencies to build different types of services, or let's say AI based like predictive analytics around insurance models and all that? Are all these capacities present within the corporation, and many a time one may need to go out and look for contracts? Like, what is the thinking around that? Because this is happening in the health sector, where the data itself is being digitized and then made available as a public resource, like we can see in the national digital health ecosystem. But the government is going to open this up and bid for AI developers, and then there is a particular risk of private capture of the value of public data. So what is your thinking about the future of what LIC has done and how this will go?
And Narasimhan, also, if you could give us a sense of, with the government putting LIC as one of the companies that will be de-invested, so would that mean that the control over the data will then be, open to the other investors? Would that be one of the impacts also? So if you could respond to these two, and is there anyone else who would like to intervene or raise a question? Okay. I don't see any further hands, so if you could go ahead with these two questions.
Yes. Uh, Nandini, it was a very nice question. I would like to tell you, LIC believes in human intelligence than artificial intelligence. I will tell you an example. I am myself a system administrator in LIC. I manage the data. I am working as system administrator since maybe last 29 years. So we are trained to do that. And big companies coming and intervening, no. We have some what you call specific requirements for insurance, unlike general health. Actuarial intelligence is needed, and actuarial intelligence comes with knowledge and experience, not with machine intervention, because it is huge risk is involved in this, and we can't depend on a machine or somebody on whom we do not have trust. So the best we thought was our employees, because we have utmost good faith in continuation of this organization and to do better service. And the slogan with which LIC came into existence was to spread the gospel of insurance to every nook and corner of the country. LIC is the only corporation which uh, concentrates on small policies in rural villages also. And we are having the quantity, the number of policy holders, it is more than the population of many countries. And still, the data is in public domain, that is within the public sector control, and the employees are fully vigilant and take care of the interest of the company and interest of the policyholders and the citizens. And we have never felt that the intelligence of our employees is anyway less than the corporate employees. In fact, we have many times our chairman and our managing directors have said that it is the commitment of the employees only which is ensuring that LIC is still the leader of the insurance market, not only in India, but throughout the world in many areas, like claim settlement. In claim settlement, LIC is number one in the world. So this is how we go about it. And when I come to Susana's question, data, when disinvestment takes place, how the data will be. So as of date, we have ensured that this doesn't go into private hands. And future also, we'll be vigilant. We'll be taking up the matter with the management and the government to ensure that basically we don't want disinvestment to happen. We are fighting against disinvestment. But if disinvestment happens, then definitely we will fight for data to be in the control of LIC only. And it should the minister, finance minister, has also made it clear that the sovereign guarantee of LIC will continue. That is the government assurance that it is the owner that will continue, and the administration will be in the hands of LIC only, even after disinvestment. So we'll definitely it can change in future also, but we'll be vigilant, and we'll always be campaigning to ensure that the people's welfare and the workers' welfare is taken care of. Thank you. Hello?
Sorry, everyone. I think Susanna dropped out for a moment. She will be back in a second.
Yeah. So in the meantime, if anybody wants to ask anything, you're
I'm
welcome.
sorry. That was a little technical glitch. My internet seems to be unstable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
So
it, Susanna.
thanks a lot. I think it's very new, I think, for many people. And as Benny asked for any information that is available, if it's not available, maybe we will have to help create it. Yeah, that's probably one of the things that come out from this. And I would like to now then continue and ask Nandini Chami from IT for Change for her intervention. Um, Nandini will intervene on the question of how can we conceptualize data governance for workers' data rights and make reflections in the Indian context. So, Nandini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. I just want to address the question of when we are looking at data governance, what are the intersections with workers' rights and the traditional debates that we have all had in this domain for a long time? And I think that there are primarily two challenges that come to mind. So the first is about the intensification of workplace surveillance. And this is a problem not only because of the privacy and personal data protection considerations, but also because it changes the way in which tracking and workplace monitoring and the existing imbalance of power in the employer-employee relationship is intensified. And in the COVID moment, what we are seeing is that public safety is becoming the new decoy or the fait accompli for utilizing or introducing or justifying many of these unaccountable workplace surveillance technologies, right from gig work to all sectors. To give you a few examples, during the pandemic, we all saw Zomato and Swiggy justifying that temperature readings and employee names of those who prepared the food and delivered the food, they were furnished to customers of online food delivery chains as a matter of routine. And very perversely, Zomato even used or quoted WHO guidelines to justify this kind of like incursion. The second thing is when people switch to remote work in traditional or typical service sector jobs, we see the rise of apps like Time Doctor that actually your employer forces you to install on your machine. And this app monitors the worker logged hours, the tabs that are open on the browser, screenshots that will automatically activate camera to check how much of attention you are paying, when are you getting distracted, etc. And we saw even leading educational services company using these apps to track their workforce during the lockdown. And the other thing that we are seeing, and this pertains to an issue that Benny had raised in his summary from the last session at the start of today's session, where in Smart Cities initiative, those types of worker surveillance initiatives that worker unions had managed to successfully challenge, they are coming back now. And I will give you the example of Chandigarh, where under the smart cities, it has introduced this GPS watch system on all its sanitation workers for tracking their work efficiency. So the watches actually provide data on how many hours somebody is clocking in, how many breaks they take, and the number of work orders that they are responding to. If a worker takes off the watch in between the shift, they are actually penalized. And there is no right to appeal about the decisions made on the basis of this database tracking. There is no practical mechanism by which workers can audit their own records. So basically it becomes an ununderstandable and the opaque system through which employers are tracking the employees. So actually the workers of Panchkula Municipal Corporation, where this had been introduced in Chhattisgarh, they had protested, and the municipal corporation had even promised to roll back or discontinue the use of trackers. But then after the pandemic, what's happening is many of the workers are also left without options, and the municipal corporation reintroduced this because they were actually saying that we will fire the workers who do not like wear it. And then the union was talking about how difficult it has become to challenge or mount a protest in this, because this is being naturalized and it's coming back. And why workplace data valence is extremely important to challenge is because of the reasons that Uniglobal Union has pointed out in its Charter of Worker Data Rights, where it's very important that whenever employees' personal data are collected and processed, it must be processed on a lawful, fair, and transparent processing, and there must be a clear purpose limitation. And there must be data minimization, that only those personal data are collected that are strictly necessary to achieve the purpose of like legitimate monitoring as part of the working relationship. And clearly, if there is a remote tracker that is installed on your laptop and it's seeing everything you are browsing, etc., this clearly violates data minimization principle, for instance. And having said that, in India, we are in a really tough place with respect to this, because we do not have a personal data protection law that is in effect. And in the existing law, we actually do not have a very strong duty on the employer to protect like workers' data rights. And the existing provision in the bill as it stands today, it doesn't cover many class of temporary workers like platform workers and other things, for instance. And it's also important that unlike in Europe, in India, we do not have a right to audit or a very clear right to explanation that our personal data protection bill currently allows. So this means that tomorrow, if in Parliament, the personal data protection bill in the current form is enacted, there will actually be no recourse for unaccountable data valence. And this is coming in all sectors, and this is a very serious concern. Now, coming to the second challenge, I want to say that this is about workers' economic rights and workers' right to share in the data value that is being generated in many sectors. As all the speakers before me have said, today data is the most critical economic resource of the economy. And as UNCTAD has pointed out, there is a double structural transformation that is happening today in all economies, right? So just like we are all familiar with how more and more services work will happen because economies transition from agriculture, manufacturing, and services, we see another movement where all these three critical economic domains are being restructured by lead firms, digital corporations, who are actually using the power of data and digital intelligence to orchestrate economic resources effectively. And what happens when value chains are restructured through data? We notice that more and more value is able to be generated with minuscule employee bases as firms modularize and outsource operations. As there is a famous statistic by The Economist, which is a neoliberal magazine, but even The Economist admits that at the height of, let's say, the industrial revolution, the car manufacturing type of capitalist model, the amount of employees that were there to generate the market value, hardly a fraction of that is available today, like when it comes to Silicon Valley model, right? So Silicon Valley companies are probably generating around $247 billion of revenue with hardly 137,000 employees, a fraction of what car manufacturers in Detroit had at the peak of the manufacturing boom. So we also notice that labor markets are getting polarized, where more and more when you have like new service work models, there is an entire gigification of the economy, and there is a reserve army of temporary workers that platforms are able to mobilize and demobilize at will. To give you an example, like Uber or Urban Clap, or as we are seeing now, even in traditional services like education and health, there is a rise of this platform service model. And one thing that is common to everything in the emerging data value chain is that the data of workers is integral to the business model of these companies, just like the data of customers and other economic actors is essential. And what facilitates this data capture is that today we do not have any clear framework for data ownership, right? Like there is no rationale about who can claim ownership or rights over data that is generated. So when big tech companies come and generate data from different transactions, by default, they are able to enclose data. Like, for example, take the case of Uber. A worker is not just driving for Uber, but when he logs on the app, what the machine observes about him, what he is actually entering into the machine, and his own, like, profile that is generated by Uber, all these contribute to the business model that enables Uber to optimize traffic. Similarly, for Amazon, the medium and small enterprise data is essential to the way Amazon is able to optimize the retail chain and control it end to end. So I would like to submit here that it might be good for us right now to think of what would be a way for us to stake workers' claim in data, an economic claim in the collective value of data and intelligence that is generated. And we should be thinking of workers at all levels and even small economic actors like farmers, for instance. And one of the things I would like to talk about later, if we have time, is about some specific models that a few cooperatives and like a few theoreticians have proposed to harness or leverage the collective value of data in ways that work for workers. And I would like to make one final point before I close. That when we think of public services today, public services are one of the most valuable repositories of like data, right? Because they have these historical records, and there is this entire business model that is lying untapped in the eyes of the big tech company. So whether we look at urban services, like there is this famous case of Google and its project to build a smart city in Toronto, or the UK National Health Service, where there have been reams and reams of like, public-private partnerships that have been built around its valuable data resources. Public services are something that all big tech companies are eyeing, like what Mr. Narasimhan had also mentioned in his presentation. And so today there is like this huge challenge before us where when we are using data from public services, how do we build models that work for citizens, for the workers in these public services, and they don't end up being models that alienate citizens' rights and alienate like workers' interests as well. Like, for example, in National Health Service of the UK government is inviting big tech companies to come and build data solutions that will actually help them reduce the number of doctors they employ, right? This is not the kind of thing one wants to build. We want data and AI based solutions that will intensify public investments and care infrastructure investments and strengthen public services. And public service workers should have a say in what happens to the data value and how it is used for public interest. So these are some of the models we should be thinking about. And in India, the conversation that is currently happening around the governance of non-personal data and building community data trust clearly gives us an opening to do this. And I would also like to talk about this later if there is time. Thank you.
So Nandini, you have a few more minutes. So if you would like to continue and talk about this, then we can take the questions afterwards.
Okay, how much time do
तुमच्याकडे
I
आणखी
have?
थोडा वेळ आहे. सो
2-3 minutes.
Okay.
2-3 मिनिटांमध्ये तुम्हाला
So
आणखी काही
I
मुद्दे
would like
मांडायचे
to
असतील तर
talk
कृपया
about,
मांडा.
the models of data trust or alternative
काही
ways
ज्या
in which we
गोष्टी
can
आहेत
leverage the power of data to make
आणखी जे
them
वेगवेगळे
work
मॉडेल आहेत
for
त्याबद्दल
workers and small
मला
economic actors.
बोलायचं आहे
I
की
would like to mention the experiments that
विशेषतः
Seva Cooperative
ज्या
Federation
पद्धतीने
is trying out,
सेवा
where with women
सहकारी
farmers and with women
संस्था
workers,
की
they are actually
महिला
trying to
कामगार
build
महिला
cooperative platform models where
शेतकरी
they are trying to
त्याच्याबद्दल
create
ते ज्या
platforms that are
पद्धतीने काम
owned by
करतात आणि
cooperative
ज्या पद्धतीचे
enterprises,
व्यासपीठ
where the entire
तयार
data that is
व्हावे
generated
आणि
will
त्या
be managed
पद्धतीने
by the worker cooperatives, and
ते विचार
those
करतात की
kinds of
सहकारी
data analytics that are
क्षेत्राकडूनच ते
generated
सगळ्या
will
गोष्टीचं
only be used
व्यवस्थापन
for
व्हावं
enhancing
आणि
the gains or
त्यांचा
incomes or business
जो काही
prospects
डेटा
of
असेल
their
तो
constituencies.
त्यांच्या फायद्यासाठीच
And one
वापरला
of the
जावा.
center
या पद्धतीने
thesis
त्यांनी
or
खूप
hallmark of
विशेष
these models is that there is no
प्रयत्नामधून
intrusive data
ते
variance.
हे
For
या गोष्टी
example, in the
करत
women
आहात.
domestic
उदाहरणार्थ
workers related cooperative
ज्या
app that
पद्धतीने
Seva is trying to build to
सहकारी
connect domestic workers
संस्था
to their
सहकारी क्षेत्रातल्या
clients or potential clients, it's
संस्था
very
असतील
clear
किंवा
that
बाकी
there will
कंपन्या
be
पण
no
की
rating
ज्याच्यामध्ये
systems that will
अ,
discriminate against the worker and which will
त्यांनी
promote an
हे पण विचार
opaqueness
केला की
that is in favor of the
भेदभाव आधारित
employer. That
रेटिंग
is how
सिस्टीम त्यांना ती
conventional
नसावी,
domestic worker client
ज्याच्यावरती खास
matching
करून
platforms are
घरगुती
designed,
कामगार जे
and
असतील
Seva will challenge this
त्यांच्याबद्दल
in its model. Both these models that I'm
बद्दलच्या
speaking
मॉडेलला
about are
पण
still
ते
not up. They are
चॅलेंज
still
करू
under
शकतील, त्याला
development.
आव्हान देऊ
And this is
शकतील.
one of the other
त्यांचे
challenges
प्रयत्न चालू
that,
आहेत त्याच्यामध्ये पण
all
काही आव्हानं
initiatives that
आहेत,
try to build
बऱ्याच अडचणी पण
alternative
आहेत,
models
पण
which will leverage
त्यासाठी
data for
पण
workers face, which is the point that
घरगुती
they
काम
will not
करणाऱ्या
have the
कामगारांच्या
capital and the
संदर्भात
resources and the
ते
investments to
प्रयत्न करतील
go
की
through the
बाबा
necessary
त्यामध्ये
incubation
किती
time that a platform
इन्व्हेस्टमेंट
model
आहे,
like
त्याच्यामध्ये किती
demands.
टाइम
We
द्यावा
all know
लागेल,
how
त्या
Amazon,
पद्धतीने
for
पण
instance, went
त्यांचे
through
प्रयत्न
20 years of losses before
सुरू
it
आहेत.
made profits, right? So
आणि
if you are
कारण हे
making an
फक्त
alternative,
फायद्याला
how can you
केंद्रस्थानी
compete with
ठेवून
an
या
Uber
गोष्टी
out there?
करता
For
कामा नये.
example, if
त्याच्या
you are like,
व्यतिरिक्त पण
a set of like
कामगारांच्या
taxi
भल्यासाठी पण याचा
drivers like
विचार
who
केला
have their
जावा.
own cooperative and are
स्वतःची
trying to
जी
make a
त्यांची
business case. If you try to make your own
सहकारी जे
platform
काही संस्था
cooperative,
असेल
is it
किंवा
realistic that
सहकार
with something like
सहकारी
Ola and Uber, where their entire
संघटना
model is
असतील,
about for years and
त्याबद्दल
years
पण
they can
त्यांचे
cash
विचार चालू
burn
आहेत.
and
पण
they can continue to sustain on
जसं
venture
ओला
capital
उबर
without making
च्या
any profit? But by that time,
संदर्भात
you would have been wiped out as a workers' cooperative trying to make an alternative platform data model. Now, these are some
त्यामुळं
of the
ओला
concerns
उबरच्या
about
बाबतीत पण
how would
आपल्याला
you actually
त्या
incubate and
कामगारांच्या
sustain and
अडचणींना
compete
पण
with them in
सामोरं
this market.
जावं लागत आहे.
And
आपल्याला हे
it also
माहितीच
brings
आहे
me to the point
आणि या
that
सगळ्या
we may need
गोष्टींचा विचार
structural
करता
interventions
ज्या
where we
पद्धतीने
recognize in law that sometimes a
वेगवेगळ्या पद्धतीचे
corporation's
मॉडेल
data
आहेत
resources
की
is
कशा
a
कशा
source of
वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारे
antitrust or
हस्तक्षेप
anti-competitive advantage, and beyond a
ते
certain
ते
threshold, maybe
आपण त्यामध्ये
corporations
करू
have to be
शकतो,
broken
ज्याच्यामुळे
up or
खरं
the data resources have to come back to a
मदत
common
होऊ
pool,
शकेल.
and there must be open
विशेषतः
licensing of those
त्यांना
data
ज्या
sets.
पद्धतीने
Like, for example, the European Union
मूलभूत
is
त्यांच्या
trying to
गरजा आहे,
think
अगदी
about
जेवणाचे मुद्दे
certain
असतील,
laws in this regard to promote mandatory data sharing by big tech
तर
companies so that
काही
the incumbents don't always gain and gain, but other people and smaller business actors and workers models
बाकी जी
also
लोक
stand a
आहेत
chance. The other question is, right now we don't have any clear rationale or logic by which we can assert workers' rights or citizen rights over the data resources that are already kind of like captured or closed or colonized by data
ज्या
companies. And
पद्धतीने
here I would like to talk about a small framework that the
डेटाशी
Digital Justice
संबंधित
Manifesto of the
ज्या
JustNet
कुठल्या गोष्टी
Coalition
असतील
has
त्याच्यामध्ये
pointed out.
Just getting a feedback that you're speaking very fast. So if you
Okay.
can just slow down and
Okay.
come
Yeah.
towards closing.
Yes. So this is
तुम्ही
a
थोडं
point that, the
खूपच
Digital
वेगात
Justice
बोलताय.
Manifesto of
थोडंसं
the JustNet
आरामात
Coalition has
बोलण्याचा
pointed
प्रयत्न करा,
out about
ज्याने अनुवाद होऊ
how to
शकेल.
change the idea of like data rights, right? So typically we look at data rights only as freedom from
कशा
data surveillance or negative rights that workers have. But we should
पद्धतीने
also be able to talk about a positive right or workers' rights, economic claims in data. And this is something I would like to place on the table. That
त्याच्यामुळे खरं हे
specific
डेटाशी
economic
संबंधित पण जे
groups
मुद्दे
that
असतील
make
त्याबद्दल
market
आपण विशिष्ट
contributions to
प्रकारे
and are
त्याचे
key
जे मुद्दे आहेत
subjects of
त्याबद्दल आपण
data in a
चर्चा केली
particular
पाहिजे.
sector
कारण
or
विशिष्ट
an
पद्धतीचा
intelligent
डेटा
system,
विशिष्ट
such as drivers
प्रकारच्या
on a taxi platform, traders on an
क्षेत्रामध्ये
e-commerce
वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारे
platform, farmers on an agri platform, or workers in data producing jobs must have primary economic rights, individual and collective, over the data they contribute. Such data constitutes the main value of the
त्यांचे
corresponding
ज्या
platform or
पद्धतीने
intelligent system. Data creating actors on a platform therefore have the right to
विशेषतः
participate in the governance of that platform, for
डेटा
example, through adequate
वेगवेगळ्या
representation on the governing board Alternatively, they may choose to pool their data to develop platform cooperatives, or a public or non-profit agency could help them to so organize. I would also like to extend this argument to talk about how, in terms of public services, we must imagine the creation of data trusts that have members from multiple constituencies, like for instance in the health sector, having a data trust where the workers of the public health service system and the patients to whom the data belongs to and other actors are all part of the decisions about how the data resources are going to be governed, because only then can we ensure that data is retained as a public good and it will be used in public interest, and it's not going to be co-opted to big tech partnerships. Thank you.
भल्यासाठीच त्याचा वापर
Thank you
केला
very
जावा.
much,
खूप
Nandini. You
खूप
really
धन्यवाद
covered a
नंदिनी.
lot of ground. I think
नंदिनी,
your
तुम्ही खूपच वेगवेगळ्या
example
मुद्द्यांना
of the
घेऊन
Panchkuala municipal corporations was
तुम्ही
very
विशेषतः
telling
महानगरपालिका
of
किंवा
what is going on,
त्यांचे जे
and
मॉडेल्स आहेत
some of the
त्याबद्दल
kind of maybe principles that you highlighted in terms of what workers can look at. Some, for instance, minimize the kind of data that is collected, look at the data not being
विशेषतः
intrusive,
डेटा कसा गोळा केला जावा, त्याचा वापर कसा
ensuring that
व्हावा,
there is no opacity that
सार्वजनिक
is in the favor of management. I think these
क्षेत्रासाठी
kind
सार्वजनिक
of
हितासाठी त्याचा
principles are
कसा
very
वापर
useful for
व्हावा,
us to kind of think this further.
त्याबद्दल
And
तुम्ही
I
जे
think
बोललात
also
की
when you mentioned
ते
the
खूप
possibility of data
महत्त्वाचे
governance by
मुद्दे
workers
होते
and the
आणि
limitations
विशेषतः
of community
डेटाचं
only of like
व्यवस्थापन आणि या सगळ्या
category of
गोष्टींना
worker
घेऊन
only owning that
समुदायातल्या
data,
लोकांना कशा
that is a
पद्धतीने
limitation, and maybe therefore there is also an
फायदा होऊ
opportunity
शकतो त्याबद्दल
in
पण
workers
तुम्ही
that
मत
are part of
मांडलं,
institutions
ते पण खूप
like a
महत्त्वाचं
municipality
होतं. आणि
where
विशेषतः
or an
महानगरपालिकेमध्ये
institution like the LIC where
किंवा
therefore
LIC मध्ये
you
ज्या
know, there is
पद्धतीने डेटा गोळा
an
केला जातो,
institution that has
या
more
सगळ्या
capacity to try to
संस्थात्मक
develop
पद्धतीने
those
ते कशा
alternative
प्रकारे
models,
डेटाचा
and
वापर
many
करू
of
शकतात,
the affiliates
या
of
सगळ्या
PSI
मुद्द्यांना तुम्ही हात
work
घातलात.
in
ते
that kind of
खूपच
setup. So
महत्त्वाचे
that's
मुद्दे
also
होते
very interesting for us to
आणि
think
हे
about.
बघणं
So
आणि
I
याबद्दल
would
विचार
like to
करणं पण
again open
खूपच
it for comments
रोचक
and questions
असेल आणि खूप
from the floor.
महत्त्वाचं आणि वैशिष्ट्यपूर्ण पद्धतीने ही मांडणी होती. आणि काही
If
प्रश्न
you
आहेत का
have any question,
कोणाकडे?
you
जर
can
कोणाकडे काही प्रश्न असतील तर तुम्ही कृपया मांडा.
unmute and speak. Yes, we have Narasimhan. Please go ahead, Narasimhan.
Nandini, you have said that some apps are there which are to be downloaded and they take care of workers' data surveillance or how they are seeing, whether they are
तुम्ही म्हणले की
concentrating or
काही
not.
असे
All
ऍप्स
these
आहेत
things.
जे डाउनलोड केल्यानंतर ते
This is
कामगारांच्या जे
legally
डेटाबद्दल
permissible. Can it not be questioned legally? Will it not intrude into
कामगारांच्या
the
डेटाचा वापर जे
what you
करतात
call
त्याला आपण
privacy of the individual?
कायदेशीर दृष्ट्या प्रायव्हसीचा मुद्दा म्हणून आपण हा मुद्दा
Okay,
उपस्थित
this
नाही
is our
करू
first
शकत. आपण त्याला
question.
काही
I'm just going
आव्हान
to
देऊ
check
शकत
if
नाही
we
का?
have any more questions before I invite Nandini to respond.
गोपनीयतेच्या जे काही त्यांचे प्रश्न असतील. आणखी काही प्रश्न आहेत का आपल्याकडे? जर कुणाचे काही प्रश्न
Don't be
असतील
shy.
तर चेक करते. अजिबात तुम्ही कसलाही संकोच बाळगू नका प्रश्न विचारण्यासाठी. कृपया आपले प्रश्न
Okay,
विचारा.
I don't see any more questions. Maybe Nandini, you can go ahead with this one.
ठीक आहे. आणखी काही प्रश्न नाहीये तर नंदिनी तुम्ही
I
या
also have a question in
प्रश्नाचं
private
उत्तर द्या.
chat in addition to Mr. Narasimhan's questions, so I will respond to both the questions. So yes, thank you
माझ्याकडे
for
काही
that, Mr.
प्रायव्हेट चॅट मध्ये पण
Narasimhan.
दोन एक प्रश्न आले.
Yes,
तर
one of
नरसिंहांच्या ज्या
the
प्रश्नाचा
problems
मुद्दा आहे
is that you know the
त्याला मी
apps
आता
that I was
उत्तर देत
talking
आहे की
about where companies
जे
force you
कुठले
to
पण
install this,
ऍप्स
and
आहेत की
this of course goes against what is permissible even within the constitutional right to privacy and what the
त्यामुळं
Kutusamu
तुमचा
judgment
जो
will talk
संविधानिक
about.
अधिकार आहे
But
गोपनीयतेसाठी
usually
त्याच्या
these are
विरुद्धच
the
असे
remote
अनेक ऍप काम
freelancers
करताना
or
आपल्याला
workers
दिसतात.
with hardly any
परंतु
bargaining power and hardly any
कामगारांसोबत
union
विशेषतः जे
force behind them, right?
फ्रीलान्सिंग
So
मध्ये काम
that
करणारे
makes it
कामगार
very
आहेत
difficult
किंवा
to say no.
कर्मचारी आहेत,
And
लोक
the
आहेत,
second problem is in these
त्यांच्या
types of
हक्काचा तर
arrangements
मुद्दा
that are becoming
कायमच
more and
राहिलेला
more
आहे. आणि
common
ज्या
as
पद्धतीने
platforms enter
सर्वसाधारणपणे
more and
वेगवेगळ्या
more all these typical white
मंचांवरती
collar
आपल्याला हे
like
बघायला भेटतं
service
की
work
खूप
areas, and
पांढरपेशी
they
असणारे
become
लोक
converted into
किंवा
fixed
कंपन्या
term
किंवा
employment
ते ज्या
contracts.
पद्धतीने
There is a very big
कंत्राटी
problem
पद्धतीने
because we have a legal lacuna since we don't have a personal data protection law, right?
वापर
There is
करतात.
a bill
त्यामुळे
and that bill has not been passed by
पर्सनल पर्सनल
agreement.
डेटा
So
प्रोटेक्शन,
what is like the
व्यक्तिगत
actionable
डेटाच्या
route through which we are going to
संरक्षणासाठीचे
challenge
जे
this?
काय
So
विधेयक
I agree
पारित
with
व्हायला
you.
पाहिजे
These
होतं
are the two
ते
reasons
होताना
it
आपल्याला
becomes
दिसत नाही. पण
complicated.
हे दोन
So
खूप
in the
महत्वाचे मुद्दे
private
आहेत
chat
की
box, I
ज्याच्यामध्ये
also had a question about,
एक प्रश्न
asking me
प्रायव्हेट
to
चॅट मध्ये
discuss a
आला
little
की
more about domestic workers in India and what are the
घरगुती कामगार
initiatives that are there.
आणि
So
त्यांच्या
I was
संदर्भातले जे
actually
काही
speaking about an
महत्वाचे
initiative
मुद्दे आहेत
where
ते पण तुम्ही
Seva
मांडावे असा पण एक
Cooperative
प्रश्न
is
होता.
trying to
आणि
bring together women
मी त्याच
domestic workers in
सहकारी
a couple of
संस्थेबद्दल
cities in
बोलेन,
Gujarat
सहकारी
and trying
संघटनेबद्दल
to
बोलेन की
build a
त्यांनी
model
कशा
where
पद्धतीने
they
एक
can
मॉडेल
connect to different
तयार
clients or
करण्याचा प्रयत्न
potential
केला ज्याच्यामध्ये
employers
ते खूप
and
वेगवेगळ्या
be
पद्धतीच्या
enabled to
कामगारांसोबत
bargain for
संपर्कात
fair
राहून
wages
त्या
and for
पद्धतीने
better terms of work
वेतन
and all these
चांगलं
things.
त्यांना कसं मिळलं पाहिजे
What
या
I was
संदर्भात
trying to
पण
say
ते
was
प्रयत्न
that
करत
there are
असतात. आणि
mainstream
माझा
models
प्रयत्न होता
in the
की याच्या
space
व्यतिरिक्त
like Book My
मुख्य
Bali,
प्रवाहातले पण
which
अनेक असे
actually
मॉडेल आहेत
work
की
in ways
ज्याच्यामध्ये
where they privilege the employer's
अ,
needs and like
ते
interests and
खूपच
also consumer preferences
कामगार
over workers' rights at every point. So
कामगारांप्रती
there is absolutely
त्यांच्या
no
बाजूने
complaint
विचार करणारे पण
mechanism
हे
or grievance
पर्याय
redress
आणि
or what happens, how does
त्यांनी
the worker
निवडलेले
know
आहेत
they are
आणि ते
going to
तशा
a home that
पद्धतीने
is safe. So these things are not
विचार
taken
करताना
care of
आपल्याला
by the
दिसतात.
platform, right? So
पण बहुतेक वेळेला
what
आपल्याला असं
Seva is
पाहायला
trying to
भेटतं
do
की
is to make a dent or try to
तरीही
carve out
असे
something
वेगवेगळे जे
alternative in the
फोरम
market
प्लॅटफॉर्म
where
मंच असतात
mainstream platforms
ते त्या
typically do not
पद्धतीने
take care of gig workers' interests. So this is the point I
करताना
was making.
आपल्याला दिसत नाही. त्यामुळे हा एक मुद्दा नक्की होता
Thanks a lot.
की
Yeah,
ज्याच्यामध्ये
and that
सेवा
also gives
खूप
us some idea
महत्वपूर्ण
of what are
पद्धतीने
the
काम
asks
करताना
that workers can have then
दिसतात. आणि ह्याच्यामुळे
even
खरं
for
तर एका पद्धतीने
mainstream
आपल्याला खूप
platforms. And I think you mentioned it very
व्यवस्थित
well, right?
एक
Have a
स्वरूप पण
system for
जाणून घ्यायला
redressal,
किंवा ह्याच्या
have a system for
बद्दलची कशी
ensuring
यंत्रणा
safety
असली
of the
पाहिजे,
workers,
तक्रार निवारणासाठी
checking
काय
on
गोष्टी
the
केल्या पाहिजे
people who are asking them
आपण. तर
to
याबद्दल पण एक
give
थोडा
their
अंदाज
services.
येण्यासाठी खूप महत्वाची
So again,
चर्चा
I
होती.
think trying to
आणि
point out some concrete things that we can collect.
काही विशिष्ट
So this is
पद्धतीने
very useful.
जर आपल्याला
If we don't have
या
any
सगळ्या
more
गोष्टींबद्दल
questions for Nandini, then
माहिती जी
I
मिळाली
would like
ती
to go
खूप
to
महत्वपूर्ण
our
होती.
third speaker,
नंदिनी,
who is
तुमच्याकडून
Jai,
जे
and Jai is going
जी
to
माहिती
speak about
मिळाली
digital
आणि
trade agreements and
विशेषतः
the
डिजिटल
policy space for data
व्यापारासाठीचे
governance,
करार
and why should
याबद्दल
we be
जय
scared
आपल्याशी
about it.
बोलतील आणि
So I
त्याबद्दल ते
invite Zai
त्या
to
या
start her
मुद्द्यांना
presentation.
घेऊन
You have 12
प्रकाश
minutes. Thank you, Zai.
टाकतील. तुमच्याकडे 12 मिनिट आहेत, तर तुम्ही
I will just start by
चर्चा
Your
सुरू करू
sound,
शकता.
there is
तुमच्या
yeah,
वतीने खूप
there is a
आवाजामध्ये
disturbance on your
खूप
side.
समस्या आहे.
okay. I'm going to try without the earphone then. Is it better now?
Yes, it might be that you need to speak close to your computer so that the sound is clear.
I hope this is good. And
It sounds good, and also there is interpretation, so please remember not to speak too fast. Thanks.
चांगला आवाज येतोय
so
आणि
I'll just start by
अनुवादासाठी फक्त
explaining
कृपया
what
थोडं
digital
हळू बोला.
trade agreements are and then
डिजिटल
what
व्यापार
provisions they
करार जे
contain
आहेत ते ज्या
and
पद्धतीने त्याच्यामध्ये काय
how
काय
these provisions affect
तरतुदी
public sector
आहेत, त्यांनी
workers or
कशा
workers in
पद्धतीने
general.
सार्वजनिक क्षेत्रामध्ये काम करणाऱ्या कामगारांवरती त्याचा प्रभाव
So
पडतो
a
वगैरे
free
या
trade
सगळ्या
agreement
मुद्द्यांबद्दल
is
मी
an
बोलणार आहे.
agreement among
आणि
2 or more
ज्या
countries
पद्धतीने खुल्या
to
व्यापारासाठी
trade in a certain way. So it puts restrictions for the large part on governments on the actions they can take. So it specifies what the government
आणि
cannot do in
सरकार
relation to
याबद्दल
business, both
कशा
domestic
पद्धतीने
business and
करू शकतं काम
international
आणि
business.
याबद्दल
So
पण
these are legal
विचार
limits. If
करणं
your
गरजेचं आहे.
government
आणि त्याला या थोड्या
violates
काही
them
कायदेशीर
after
मर्यादा
signing the
पण आहेत ज्या
agreement,
पद्धतीने
your government is doing something illegal. So
सरकारने
governments don't usually violate them. Even
सरकारने
if
एकदा का
you
त्या करारावरती सही केली की
do a people's
सर्वसाधारणपणे
movement
अपेक्षित असं आहे
against
की
something,
सरकारने त्या
if that
कायद्यांचं
thing
त्या
is
नियमांचं उल्लंघन
illegal
करू नये.
under
पण
a
असं
trade
होताना आपल्याला
agreement, your
दिसत
government
नाही.
cannot do it. So
आणि सरकारचे पण
they have to
हातबाजलेले
withdraw
आहेत.
from that trade agreement
बऱ्याच
in
वेळेला
order to legally listen to your demands if
कायदेशीर
they're part
दृष्ट्या
of this
तुमच्या
agreement. That's why
देशामध्ये
they
ते
are
लागू
very
करण्यासाठी
important.
बऱ्याच वेळेला त्यांना काही
So the World
मोडावे
Trade
लागतात,
Organization,
जोडावे
which
लागतात.
includes most countries in the
आणि
world,
विशेषतः
is a forum where some of these trade
जागतिक
deals are
व्यापारी
signed,
संघटना
and then you have
सोबत ज्या
regional
पद्धतीचे
trade
करार
deals also,
केले
like the
जातात त्या
Regional Comprehensive Economic
सोबत
Partnership
प्रादेशिक काही
or
करार आणि
RCEP.
प्रादेशिक काही
And you
पार्टनरशिप
have
साठी
some bilateral trade deals
आणि
also,
काही
which are between two countries.
द्विपक्षीय किंवा
So
दोन देशांमधले
what's
जे
happening
संबंध आहेत त्याच्या
recently among
कराराबद्दल
these
पण
trade
तुम्हाला
deals
चर्चा करावी
is that
लागते.
they
कधी-कधी
have started
त्या
to
पद्धतीने
include
तुम्हाला ते करार
chapters
करायला
on
लागतात. आणि बऱ्याच वेळेला
e-commerce. And what these
कॉमन्स
chapters really
पद्धतीचे
contain
जे
are rules for
चॅप्टर्स आहेत
digital trade in
त्याच्याबद्दलची
general.
प्रकरण
So they will contain
आपल्याला बघायला
provisions such
भेटतील.
as
त्यामध्ये काही तरतुदी
there
अशा
must
आहेत
be
की
free
त्यामध्ये
flow of data. What this means
एक
is
जी
that it is
तरतूद आहे
illegal for
त्याच्यामध्ये
your
की
government to ask a
तुम्ही
company to store
खुलेपणाने त्या
data
पद्धतीने
within that company, within your own country. Sorry. So the government of India cannot tell Google to store Indian people's data or data generated in India.
म्हणजे
In
उदाहरणार्थ
India.
सरकार असं
So
म्हणू शकतं की
Google can
भारताचे
just say that this is illegal and can store it wherever it wants. And when
आणि
the
ह्याच्यामध्ये
data is not
कायदेशीरदृष्ट्या
stored in your
खूप
country,
द्वंद्व आहे.
it's very difficult to
भारत असं
regulate
म्हणू शकतं की
anything about that
भारतातल्या
data
जनतेचा
because
जो
you
डेटा
cannot
आहे तो तुम्ही
physically
सेव्ह
access
करू
it. The
शकत नाही.
servers are not in your
तो तुम्ही
country.
साठवून ठेवू शकत नाही. परंतु गुगल असं म्हणू शकतं
And
की आमच्याकडे त्याच्या
so the
परमिशन आहेत आणि
problem
आम्ही
with this
त्याला
is
सेव्ह
that
करू शकतो. म्हणजे हे
if
जे
you even
एक
make
द्वंद्व
provisions
सुरू
like
आहे की
Nandini was
ज्याच्यामध्ये काही
explaining for
तरतुदी जरी तुम्ही तयार केल्या
sharing of data, if you
आणि
make it mandatory for Google to share data, you cannot
गुगल
implement
साठी जर
that regulation if that data is not even in your country. You physically cannot unless Google decides that it will comply with your regulation. You can just choose to not comply.
तुम्ही जर तो डेटा शेअर करणं जर
So
अनिवार्य
when
केलं
you cannot
गुगलसाठी
access the
तर
data, you cannot build
गुगल
public alternatives as
बांधील
well
पडतं की त्यांनी
to
हा डेटा
large
बाकी
multinational companies
कंपन्यांशी
because their
शेअर
power is
करायचा.
based on the
पण
data that they have
ते
accumulated
ऍक्च्युली
over so many
डेटा
years.
आणि सत्ता संबंध जगातले किंवा
So
गुगलच्या
when you
त्या
cannot
देशाशी
build
कसे
public
आहेत त्या
alternatives, you cannot
पद्धतीने
have that many jobs
या
in the
सगळ्या गोष्टी
public sector
ठरतात.
as
आणि
well. So
सार्वजनिक
especially
क्षेत्राच्या
for
बाबतीत
something
पण
at
तसंच
the
आहे.
city
सार्वजनिक
level where cities would like to do
क्षेत्रासाठी
certain
शहराच्या
public works
पातळीवरती काही
and
सार्वजनिक
a lot of
फायद्यासाठी खूप
data
प्रयत्न
that
जर
would help to do this
शहरी
work is
भागात जर
available
वापर केला
only
जात
with
असेल तर
foreign multinational
त्याचा जो वापर आहे
technology companies.
बहुतेक वेळेला
It
आपल्याला असं
puts
दिसतं
the city
की
at a disadvantage when
परदेशातल्या
it cannot
शहरी
access this
दुसऱ्या
data
एखाद्या
at all.
कंपनी सोबत
So
त्याचा वापर
another thing
खूप
that
होताना दिसतो
these
कारण डायरेक्टली
agreements do
त्याच्यामध्ये
is that they make it
फायद्याशी असलेला
illegal for your
खासगी
government
कंपन्यांचा
to
संबंध हे
ask for
आपल्याला
access to
दिसून
source
येताना दिसेल.
codes, which is the code
त्यामुळे काही
or the software that determines how a lot of these programs run, right? And when a
असे
lot of
सॉफ्टवेअर्स
work is
आहेत
now
की ज्याच्यामध्ये
becoming so
तुम्ही हे बघू
precarious
शकता की
and
कशा
risky,
पद्धतीने ते
when a lot of pay is
आपल्या
determined
डेटाचा
through
वापर करतात
algorithms,
आणि
when
खूप सारे जे
your working conditions or
कामाची
if
तुमची
you're subjected
परिस्थिती
to so
कशी
much
आहे, तुम्ही
surveillance
काय
that
पद्धतीचे
they're
व्यवहार
checking
करणार
your keystrokes,
आर्थिकदृष्ट्या
etc. If
किंवा
that is
काही
being determined
ऍप्स
through
तर
software, where how many hours you have worked, how hard
किती
you have
तास
worked,
तुम्ही काम
therefore how much
केलंय,
money you should
तुमचे
earn. If
कीपॅड किती
if
वेळ
it is being
चाललं,
said that you don't even
कशा
have
प्रकारे
the
त्याचा
right to
वापर झाला
check that
कीपॅडचा,
software,
म्हणजे
whether
ह्या
it's working
सगळ्या गोष्टी
correctly,
सुद्धा
whether it's working
निगराणी ठेवून
fairly,
खूप
this is what this agreement is saying. It's a violation of your right as a worker to know how your working conditions and
संशयाने
your
पाळत
pay are being
ठेवून ते काम
determined
केलं
even through
जातं
the
की खरं तर
most
हे
minimum
इल्लीगल आहे, हे
level of privacy.
बेकायदेशीर आहे.
And
तुमच्या
we know that
खाजगी
LIC has its own, homegrown,
ज्या
in-house
पद्धतीने
sort of software to
काम
do
केलं
these
पाहिजे
things,
तुमच्या
but
गोपनीयतेवरती हा घाला
a
घातलेला
lot of
आहे.
companies don't. A lot of
बऱ्याच
companies
वेळेला
enter into public-private
म्हणजे
partnerships,
LIC मध्ये
and
पण आपण
these
आजच्या
agreements just
प्रेझेंटेशन मध्ये
remove their
पाहिलं की
ability to negotiate on
त्यांनी
this point, on saying
बऱ्याच
that
मुद्द्यांना
you
धरून
must
कामगारांच्या
store the data here,
संघटनांनी
or we must have
डेटाशी
access to source
संबंधित
codes,
काम
because
करण्याचे
we
प्रयत्न
cannot
केलेले आपल्याला
negotiate
पाहायला
through
मिळाले.
the state essentially, because the state is not allowed to require anything. So
बऱ्याच
the rule of law cannot
आपल्याला
function in the workers'
असं
interests
दिसून येतं की
because these things are already made illegal under these agreements.
काही करारांमध्ये काही गोष्टी तर
When
एकदम
you close
बेकायदेशीर
off
आहेत,
access to
परंतु
source codes, you
प्रत्येक
also
वेळेला ते
close off
आपापल्या
the access to
पद्धतीने त्याचा वापर करताना
technology transfer.
आणि
So a
तंत्रज्ञानाच्या
lot of alternatives
हस्तांतरणाशी
that were built
संबंधित
to
पण
large private companies were
तुम्हाला
actually built
मोठ्या
through
कंपन्यांच्या
technology transfer.
पातळीवरती
And
तंत्रज्ञानाच्या पातळीवर
often
कसं
such transfer of technology is
तंत्रज्ञानाच्या
a
पातळीवर
condition
कसं हस्तांतरण
on
केलं
which
जातं या
you
डेटाचं,
allow private
याचे
foreign
पण जे काही
companies to
नियम आहेत ते
function
कसे
in your
पाळले गेले
country,
पाहिजेत हे बघणं
so that
खूप
you can
गरजेचं
also
आहे.
build
त्यामुळं
alternatives. You can also
तुमच्या
learn from them
देशामध्ये
in exchange
हे
for
या
providing them with
पद्धतीचे
a
कशा
market. But such agreements
याचे
close off
तरतुदी
that
आहेत,
option,
नियम काय
and
आहेत,
so
कायदे
they
काय आहेत,
provide an
हे
impetus
बघून
to
काम
privatization,
करणं
to
खूप गरजेचं
the
आहे.
public sector not being able to catch up. because it's not able to access that source code.
आणि
And
विशेषतः
that's why
तुम्ही
these
हे बघितलं
agreements are
पाहिजे
so
सार्वजनिक
dangerous. They're dangerous for
क्षेत्राच्या
reasons
बाबतीत
that
विचार करत
they
असताना
enable surveillance of workers but
अं,
don't give workers any power over the data that is generated through that surveillance
कामगारांच्या
to
किंवा
fight their own
कर्मचाऱ्यांना
cases based on
बरेच
that data. And
पॉवर त्यांना
they
सत्ता किंवा
reduce the
त्यांच्या हातामध्ये बरेच
space
हक्क दिलेले
to make
असतात किंवा त्यांचे
public
हक्क अबाधित
alternatives
असतात
to
असं
these
दिसून येतं
large and
परंतु
powerful
बहुतेक
technology
वेळेला या
companies,
हक्कांचं हनन
which
होताना आपल्याला
reduces
दिसून
the
येतं
opportunity for
आणि
employment in public
कर्मचाऱ्यांच्या हातात मग
services
नंतर
as well.
काहीच राहत नाही
And
आणि
they
त्यांचं आपल्या
reduce
डेटावर
our ability
पण
to
काही
use the
नियंत्रण
state or the
नसतं
government as a
त्यामुळं
tool to regulate
सरकार
large technology
हीच एक
companies. I think that's
साधन
about it. I can speak later, maybe
एक
in the questions or in
काम
closing
केलं पाहिजे
remarks.
की त्यांनी काय प्रकारे या गोष्टी
Thanks a lot, Zai. I think it's very important how you explain that the kind of governance of data that we need as part of a broader governance of the digital economy
हे खूप
is being
महत्वाचा मुद्दा
discussed
तुम्ही
in
बोलला
what are
की
called trade
डिजिटल
agreements,
आर्थिक
clearly a misnomer, but with an
व्यापारामध्ये कशा
intention to give
पद्धतीने
power to
हे खरं
corporations and allow them
काम
to
करणं
go
गरजेचं आहे
with the
ज्या
kind of
पद्धतीने तुम्ही
private
बोललेला
access to
आहात
data
आणि
and
विशेषतः डेटाला
privatization of data
खाजगी
that they're
पद्धतीने
interested in, and therefore cutting the space for the kind of alternatives that we discussed today. So thank you for that.
त्यामुळं खूप
I'm going to
धन्यवाद
then
की
reopen it
विशिष्ट पद्धतीने तुम्ही
for
खाजगीकरण
discussion.
सरकारची भूमिका डेटा
Do I
या
have
सगळ्या
any
गोष्टीचं
hands
जोडून
up?
जे प्रेझेंटेशन केलं ते खूप सादरीकरण उत्तम होतं
Anyone who would
आणि
like
आपल्याकडे
to
कुणाचे
either
प्रश्न
intervene?
असतील काही तर तुम्ही
Prakash, we
कृपया
haven't heard you today.
प्रकाश तुमचा आवाज नाही ऐकला आज आणि
Do we have Prakash with us?
प्रकाश आज आपल्या सोबत आहेत का
Yeah, I am there, but since morning I am doing 3 webinars, and again I got 6 at 6. I think it's going on very good. There is no problem. Taking, I think, let others intervene, ask questions and all. This presentation is very good. I am hearing everything. I don't think that I am keeping away, but I am hearing everything, and it's good going on. Okay.
Thanks,
Anybody
Prakash.
wanted to ask? There are many people who they don't. Why don't they participate? We should make them to participate now. We will have 30, 35, 28 people are there.
So we do have many people, and to remind that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Prakash.
All participants should ask some questions on this. Digitalization is very, very important because what Narasimhan has said is rightly, he has got his own experience, and that experience is very relevant for this subject matter. Of course, I do not have any question on this, but I am hearing on the issue.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Before we have a question from Narasimhan and a question from Benny. So I will start with Narasimhan.
Yes. I would like
Please
to
go
say the last recession, the Great Recession, India was the least affected because of strong public sector financial institutions. And data is very important for continuing that. As far as LIC is concerned, again, I would like to say, apart from our regular business and employee data, pension is a very big issue now, pension data. Because the multinationals are viewing pension as a very gold mine of data. I would like to say LIC is one of the fund managers for this new pension scheme. There are two types of pensions. One is old pension scheme, another is new pension scheme, or it is called the national pension system. In LIC, the employees who have been appointed after 2010 are covered under the NPS. So LIC being the fund manager for running this new pension scheme, you should have signed an MOU with Pension Fund and Regulatory and Development Authority, PFRDA. It is compulsory. And we are the only union which has filed an RTI with LIC management asking them whether they have signed an MOU with PFRDA. They said no. Then we said, if we are one of the fund managers for the country for pension, new pension scheme, why we should not run the employee scheme ourselves? Why we should have an MOU with PFRDA to this effect? The matter was taken up with the government of India, and LIC employees new pension scheme is also run by LIC, and that data is also with us. We have total control on that data also. Just I wanted to share this information with you because trade is not regulated to business only. Trade is now going beyond that, looking into privacy issues, and trade is affecting the lives and livelihood of the people in every way. Hence, nobody should think that trade is not my subject and why I should be interested. Trade is very important and it affects every aspect of the workers' of official and personal and future savings also. So this is very important, and I just wanted to put this view rather than asking a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narasimhan. And yes, we are very happy if people also want to intervene to put forward a perspective. It doesn't have to be a question. We have Benny, and also to remind that we have interpretation. So if you want to ask a question in Hindi, in Marathi, in Tamil, that's also completely possible. So feel free to intervene in the language that you're most comfortable in. Benny, you had a question?
Yes, I initially had a question, but I think I'll sort of revise it to just making a broad comment, trying to link up all the three presentations. And taking on from the last point that Zai made about how trade agreements reduce the policy space for public alternatives and public interest regulations, which is what I think we need to urgently do as economies rapidly sort of digitize. So the point that Narasimhan made was, here's a public sector company that is trying to evolve its own systems that are worker-friendly, consumer-friendly, and advance the public interest. And then Nandini spoke about how cooperatives are trying to get a space within this, emerging sort of platform economy space. But I think the important thing is for both the LIC and for cooperatives to thrive, we need to be able to overcome the structural sort of challenges, right? For cooperatives, and she articulated that they need to get access to finance, and it's not just finance, they also need industrial policy tools. They need to get preferential treatment. You need to have regulations on work conditions of platform employees, minimum wages. And linking it up to the point that Zai made, that if India makes these far-reaching binding commitments through FTAs or trade agreements, we lose all of that policy space. So for instance, if LIC needs to create its own systems, we need to ensure that India does not sign a government procurement agreement in the WTO. If India signs a government procurement agreement, if LIC is trying to do its own sort of, in-house procurement of IT, etc., a foreign firm can say that, that should be open up to, open bidding. The point is that LIC will not be able to specialize in all aspects of the digitization challenge. And like, Nandini said, AI, maybe they might want to give it to a domestic arm of the Indian government that is maybe invested in artificial intelligence. But what will happen if you've signed up a trade agreement is that AI contract will have to be opened up for any global player to bid for. And therefore LIC cannot, governments can't privilege either their own actors or domestic private actors. So I think on all of these positive elements that we heard from LIC and possible avenues for creating platform cooperatives, it's very important for the government to step in and support cooperatives and support LIC. And I think the trade agreement space will close all of these opportunities for posterity for India. And which is why it's very important for us um, to be campaigning against any possible e-commerce or digital chapters in trade agreements.
Thank you very much, Vinny. And I think you expanded the discussion on, the dangers of the trade agreement to even one more tool that is there, the government procurement agreements. And as many people know here, despite that they are called trade agreements, free trade agreements cover a broad range of issues from import duties to government procurement to the digital economy and data related regulation to foreign direct investment to services. It's really encompassing, and in many locations, the aim is to constrain the government's ability to regulate private players and foreign players, and through that also limiting the policies and the policy space for industrial development, but even for provision of services in the public interest. So these are really a lot of the challenges we face. Narasimhan, did you want to make a further comment? Great, okay.
Very small comment. I would like to say that I totally agree with Benny on whatever he has said. And I would like to inform that the government of India is taking steps for listing LIC disinvestment, listing LIC shares in foreign stock exchanges also, outside the country also, because they think that the huge disinvestment, that funds may not be there in the country for people to invest or purchase, so they are going to list it abroad also, hence our concerns are increasing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. And maybe I'm just going to move the discussion back to Nandini, who also has a comment. But I just wanted to ask Nandini to also maybe if you could speak a bit more about what is happening at the level of policy around data governance in India. So we spoke about the challenges of where spaces are possibly going to be reduced through trade agreements. But can you give us a bit more? You started talking about it, but maybe develop a bit more about what is there already, what is in the pipeline, what is it that we would actually need in terms of maybe policies and laws around data governance, and also, of course, comments you wanted to make.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to comment on this aspect only. So that's a coincidence. Yeah. So I think that there are two aspects of data governance policy developments that we should be attuned to. And the first is extremely important for those of us working in the public sector, public services especially. So recently, earlier this year, the government has come out with plans for making what it calls national open digital ecosystems. So this is the idea that, and this relates to the question on cloud infrastructure that you were asking, Susanna, at the start of the meeting. You had raised this point. So in every sector, there seems to be the idea that data will be the critical source of value, right? And then different packets of data, if they are lying around in a scattered way or in a way where one cannot generate intelligence out of it, it is seen as that's not like, really beneficial. So we need something where there will be a cloud infrastructure, data storage, data warehousing, where for particular public agencies in different sectors, whether agriculture or health or urban transportation, the government will put the financial investment to create these systems so that India can go into the digital revolution. That's the kind of thinking the government has. On the surface of it, this is a great idea because, yes, this seems to be very appropriate because the wealth of public services data should be owned by no one other than government, and the investment has to happen with government, and public agencies have to partner, and we have to encourage even private parties and maybe even mandate them through mandatory data sharing rules like Zai was also referring to in the end. So all this seems great. But then there is one question which the open digital ecosystem thinking, and even as can be seen in the National Digital Health Infrastructure Blueprint that the government has issued now, which is a particular case of open digital ecosystem it's making in the health sector, there is one very problematic silence. Once we build all this, like, data infrastructure, and we have got everything into a data commons, what are the rules of access? Who can access, use, and build intelligence on top of this? And if this is undefined, there is a very real danger that private companies, big tech companies, foreign multinationals come and use this data, and then they will lock up the artificial intelligence products and the bulk of the value that comes out of this, right? So how do you govern public private partnerships that will happen? There is a very big hole here, and we should actually start thinking about it. And there is also the question of what partnerships should be permitted and not permitted. Like, for example, the Chandigarh city example I mentioned earlier, there must be a rule that in a data commons around a smart city, such kind of a partnership should not be permitted, right? Like, what you can do, what kind of like case use cases you cannot build on top of public data. There needs to be greater thinking around this, and this is something we should all engage with. The second point is that we are all familiar with the Personal Data Protection Bill and its problems, but there is one small point I would like to highlight, that in its current form, the Indian bill does not have a right to explanation. And this will become a very big problem because it means workers will find it very difficult to go and scrutinize, practices of workplace tracking, or to demand, like, algorithms being opened up. And this is one area we really have to be like careful, and we really have to fight for. And the third and final point actually is that the government is right now thinking about a framework for the governance of non-personal data. Now, what does this mean? We are all aware of this idea that when we work on platforms and we engage, and through our behavior we are producing data footprints, we are all familiar with the idea of personal data. But there are also many forms of data footprints that are there in the world which are not directly traceable back to a particular individual, right? Like, for instance, meteorological data or urban transportation, just like traffic patterns and things like this. So who governs this mass of data, and who has the right to enjoy the benefits of products built on top of this, right? So there is a thinking now that we have to have these ideas that around each of these data sets, there are communities of interest that are there, right? Like, if you're looking at data from the neighborhood of Jayanagar for a Bangalore smart city project, then the neighborhood of Bangalore and the citizens of Bangalore have a claim in that data of, like, whatever is collected around about that neighborhood and what is built on top of it. Sometimes these communities will be interest based. Like, for instance, in the entire set of intelligence that Uber has about, like, transportation patterns, workers have a claim, right? And workers have a claim not just in the data they input or to their individual data profile that Uber has about them, but also a fair share in the benefits of, like, this entire value that Uber is generating through its business case, right? So this is the kind of thinking that the non-personal data thinking in India, where there is a committee, and the committee has come out with an expert report where some kind of attempt has been made to create a claims framework for non-personal data. So this is something we have to watch out for, because this is not a policy yet or something, but there are these promising openings which we can think about and form data trusts or ways of like working. This is something that we should be tracking.
Thank you so much, Nandini. Yeah, so we have, I think, through the discussion, heard of different language or principles that workers can try to integrate into collective bargaining frameworks at the workplace, and there is also this other language and demands that come more into what are broader data policies that might be national or at a lower level. And I think public services workers can identify with, being workers at some points, but sometimes being users or sometimes being part of a community. And these are probably the different set of actors that need to be brought together in different combinations. Do we have more comments? Any more interventions from the floor? So I would like then to ask our three speakers for some ideas of some recommendations for a kind of way forward, or important things that as unions we should either keep in mind or ask for ways that we could intervene. So yes, what would be, what you think would be important directions in which we should take this discussion forward. So I would like to ask the three speakers maybe to respond to this, starting with Narasimhan.
Yes. I would like to say the need of the hour with relation to the issue on which I have talked. Need of the hour is to establish an adequate framework for introduction and use of digital technology in public services. Such regulation must be developed in close dialogue with workers and trade unions through meaningful participation, information, and consultation, and by negotiating relevant wording in collective agreements. This can be a very good way forward. It will take care of the workers' interest and the interest of the citizens' data also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narasimhan. I'll continue with Nandini.
Yeah. So I just have 2 points to make. I think adding on to what Mr. Narasimhan said, the fact of public data infrastructure investments and how to govern public data infrastructure, this has to become a very critical advocacy agenda for public service unions. That is what I think. And the second issue is that workers' data rights are actually becoming the new frontier of the labor movement in this like digital age that we are living in, and public service union must also join the larger struggle for workers data rights, and connecting with groups that are looking at both moves against data valence, but also groups that are trying to establish claims in data as a source of value and trying to build alternative worker owned production models, because that old question of the workers movement that returns in the digital epoch. Like, if data is the source of value, how can workers reclaim it? How can workers build business models around it to claim data value and build equal business models? So these are the two things I think are important priorities.
Thank you very much for this, Nandini. Zai?
Thanks. I think I have a somewhat similar point, which is to build the capacity to use data, not only among our public sector undertakings, but also among the unions of these public sector undertakings. So we can go ahead and claim that certain non-personal data or aggregated data should also belong to PSUs or to the unions. But then we have to have the capacity to use that data effectively to mount a challenge to private and to private capital. So I think it's about time for unions to start thinking about these capacity building measures. So not just by understanding how all of this works, but also through the technical skills that are needed to make these systems actually function.
Thanks a lot, Zai. So very concrete points and options for intervention also. Do we have more comments from the floor? Anyone who would like to intervene and say a few more words? It can be a question or a comment. Okay, so I think we had a very fruitful discussion, and these are also in many ways new ideas for us that it will take some time to develop in more detail. For the PSI members here, just to remind everyone, I think there was an email from head office asking for language that has been used by unions to regulate data rights in our workplaces. And as you know, after PSI developed a report about how digitalization is impacting the workplace, now the idea is also to look at model clauses of what kind of language unions should be pushing for, and try to collect what has already been done to allow unions to build on the experiences in different countries, as this is really a global phenomenon. So do remember to share your experience on that. I think Narasimhan, you have already spoken about a lot of those elements that could definitely give a lot of content for this work that PSI is trying to do. I also want to remind you of two important, three actually, reports that PSI has published over this year. The first one is about digitalization in public services, and I'm going to share the link in the chat box. This is a report that looks at the kind of trends that are coming up in digitalization in public services, again, across the world, but it also has very concrete examples with case studies that you might find interesting if you haven't seen it yet. The second one is called Economic Rights in a Database Society, so developing on many of the arguments that Nandini did, talking about why this is important and relevant today, and what are the components of what economic data rights could mean, including for workers. And the last one is called Surrendering Public Good to the Private Interest, and looks more specifically at the digital trade rules, how big tech is pushing for them, aiming to use them, and again, it has case studies that include a case study from India. So do take a look at these documents when you have a chance. And this is the last of the series of webinars that we have. So really would like to thank all of you for your active participation. Thank the co-organizers that have really contributed in a very active way to try to frame this in a way that makes it most interesting. And a big thank to the interpreters that have been with us for the whole series. We will continue developing this work in PSI, and we really look forward to work with all of you on this in the future. So with that, I would like to close. So thank you very much, everyone. If you want